Have you ever walked into your garden early on a quiet summer morning and felt certain that today your plants would look even better than yesterday? You are holding a warm cup of coffee and looking across the rows of vegetables that you have been taking care of for weeks. You notice the tomato plants growing taller, you see the pepper plants starting to flower, and you feel a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing that your garden is slowly coming to life. But then you walk a little closer. You bend down to look at the plants more carefully, and suddenly something does not look right. Have you ever seen tomato leaves that looked perfectly healthy the day before, suddenly covered with holes? Have you ever noticed tiny aphids gathered along the stems of your pepper plants? Have you ever planted a squash seed with care only to walk outside one morning and find half of its leaves gone overnight? And in that moment, you probably ask yourself a simple question. What happened here? How could a garden change so much in just a single night? If you have ever grown vegetables before, these questions probably sound familiar. Almost every gardener experiences this moment sooner or later. You prepare the soil carefully. You water the plants regularly. You wait patiently as they grow stronger each day. But then pests arrive, and suddenly it feels like the balance of the garden has shifted. Why do pests seem to appear just when plants begin to grow well? How do insects manage to find your plants so quickly? And how can just a few insects cause so much damage to an entire vegetable plant? According to agricultural research around the world, pests destroy up to 40% of crop production every year. That number includes farms of every size, from large agricultural fields to small backyard gardens. Even experienced farmers struggle with the same problem. In a home garden, the effect can be even more noticeable. It only takes a few insects to cause serious damage. One of the most well-known examples is the tomato hornworm. This Amish green caterpillar blends almost perfectly with tomato leaves. Many gardeners do not even notice it at first. But a single hornworm can eat most of the leaves from a young tomato plant in just a few days. Because of that, many gardeners react in the same way. When they see pests, they reach for a spray bottle. They walk through the garden and treat every plant hoping the insects will disappear. And sometimes they do disappear for a short time. But have you ever noticed that the problem often returns again? Have you ever watched pests vanish for a week only to come back later in the season? Does every gardening year start to feel like the same battle repeating itself? If spraying were truly the perfect solution, then why do gardeners continue facing the same problem year after year? A few years ago, I started asking myself that exact question. And then I visited a place that made me rethink the entire idea of pest control in the garden. That place was Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. This region is home to many Amish communities, where families have been growing food for generations. As I walked past their gardens, something immediately stood out. The plants looked strong and healthy. Tomato stems were thick and sturdy. The leaves were deep green. The vegetable beds were full and vibrant. What surprised me most was the lack of serious pest damage. But the biggest surprise came when I learned how these gardens were managed. Many Amish families do not rely on synthetic pesticides. They also do not depend heavily on the kinds of sprays that modern gardeners often use. So the question became even more interesting. How could these gardens remain productive and healthy without relying on chemical pest control? Perhaps the real secret is not about killing pests at all. Perhaps the secret lies in how the garden itself is designed. And that is exactly what we are going to explore together in this video. After seeing those gardens in Lancaster County, I began asking myself a very simple question. What exactly made these gardens different from the gardens I had been familiar with for so many years? Why did the vegetables there look stronger and healthier, even though the gardeners were not relying on the kinds of sprays that many modern gardeners use? At first, I assumed the difference was simply experience. Perhaps the people who worked those gardens had been doing it longer than I had. But the more time I spent observing and talking with gardeners in that community, the more I realized that the real difference was not a secret trick or a special product. The real difference was the way they thought about the garden. For most of my gardening life, I had treated pest control like a battle. When insects appeared, my first instinct was to remove them as quickly as possible. I searched for ways to eliminate pests using sprays or treatments. But that way of thinking had an important weakness. It meant that I was always reacting to problems after they had already started. Amish gardeners approached the situation from a completely different perspective. They did not begin with the question of how to kill pests. Instead, they began with a different question. How can the garden function as a balanced ecosystem? That idea changes everything. Instead of trying to control every element of the garden, they focus on creating conditions where natural processes can regulate themselves. In nature, insects do not exist only as pests. Many insects also play an important role in controlling other insect populations. When a garden contains enough diversity, beneficial insects help keep pest populations from growing too large. But when gardeners spray chemicals widely, they often remove both the harmful insects and the helpful ones. Without natural predators, pest populations can actually rebound, even faster. Modern agricultural science now uses a concept that closely resembles this approach. It is called integrated pest management. Many universities and agricultural organizations recommend this system as a more sustainable way to manage pests. The main idea behind integrated pest management is that pest control should not rely only on chemical treatments. Instead, it combines several strategies such as healthy soil, diverse planting, careful observation, and the encouragement of beneficial insects. When I started to view my garden through that lens, I realized something important. The real problem was not just the insects feeding on the leaves. The real issue involved the entire system of the garden. If the soil is weak, plants grow weaker. Weak plants are more vulnerable to pest damage. If the garden does not support beneficial insects, then even a small number of pests can multiply quickly. Everything in the garden is connected. Each element influences the others. Amish gardeners have understood this principle for generations, long before modern research began describing it in scientific terms. Instead of solving each problem separately, they design their gardens as small ecosystems where every element plays a role. They build fertile soil so plants grow strong. They plant different crops together so pests have difficulty locating their host plants. They create habitat that encourages beneficial insects to live and reproduce within the garden. When all of these factors work together, the garden begins to regulate itself. What fascinated me most was how simple many of these practices actually were. They did not require expensive equipment or complicated technology. Most of the changes involved adjusting how the garden was planned and how closely the gardener observed natural patterns. Once I understood this shift in thinking, the most important question changed. Instead of asking how to destroy pests quickly, the better question became this: how can we design a garden where serious pest problems rarely develop in the first place? And the first step toward building that kind of garden does not begin with spraying leaves. It begins somewhere that many gardeners often overlook. It begins in the soil. Once you begin to think about the garden as an ecosystem, rather than a battlefield against pests, an important realization starts to emerge. Most garden problems do not begin on the leaves of plants. They begin in the soil. This is something many gardeners often overlook. When we see insects feeding on leaves, our instinct is to treat the insects. But experienced growers often start with a different question. How healthy is the soil supporting those plants? Soil is far more than a place that simply holds roots in place. It is a complex living environment filled with millions of microorganisms. These organisms break down organic material, release nutrients, and support the overall health of plants. When soil contains a rich amount of organic matter, and microbial life plants tend to grow stronger. Stems, deeper green leaves, and better resilience against stress. Modern agricultural research has shown that crops grown in biologically active soils often experience fewer pest problems. This does not mean insects disappear entirely. In a natural garden, some level of pest activity is normal. But strong plants can tolerate small amounts of damage without serious harm. Amish gardeners have understood this principle for generations, long before scientific studies described it in detail. One of the most important practices they repeat every year is improving soil through the use of compost. Compost is decomposed organic material. It can include fallen leaves, plant scraps, straw, and sometimes aged animal manure. When compost is added to the upper layer of soil, it feeds beneficial microorganisms and improves soil structure. Adding a layer of compost several centimeters thick before planting season can make a noticeable difference in how plants develop. The soil holds moisture more effectively, while still allowing air to reach plant roots. Nutrients are released slowly and consistently over time. Healthy soil creates the foundation for stronger plants. But soil health is only the first step. Once the foundation of the garden is improved, the way plants are arranged also becomes extremely important. A common pattern in many modern gardens is to plant crops in long separate rows. Tomatoes in one section, beans in another, cabbage in a different area. This layout may look neat and organized, but to insects, it can function like a clear signal pointing toward their food source. Many pest insects locate host plants through scent cues released by the plants themselves. When an insect encounters a long row of the same crop, those scent signals become very strong and easy to follow. Amish gardeners often use a different planting strategy. Instead of isolating crops, they mix different plants together within the same garden space. Vegetables grow alongside herbs and flowers that produce strong natural aromas. For example, basil is commonly planted near tomatoes. The strong fragrance of basil can interfere with the ability of certain insects to locate tomato plants. Basil also attracts some beneficial insects that help maintain balance in the garden. Another example involves planting dill or cilantro near cabbage family crops, such as broccoli or kale. When these herbs flower, they provide nectar that attracts helpful predatory insects. Marigold flowers are often planted along the edges of vegetable beds. The roots of these flowers can release compounds that reduce certain harmful organisms in the soil. When many different plants grow close together, the scent environment of the garden becomes more complex. This complexity can make it harder for pests to identify the exact location of their preferred host plants. Instead of viewing the garden as simple rows of isolated crops, the gardener begins to create a diverse environment where plants support each other. Healthy soil strengthens plant growth. Diverse planting reduces the ability of pests to easily locate food sources. Together, these two principles create the foundation for a more balanced garden. And once that foundation is in place, the next step is learning how to invite the natural allies that help protect the garden every day. As soil health improves and different plants begin growing together in the same garden space, the entire environment slowly changes. Plants develop stronger stems and thicker leaves, and the garden becomes more diverse and resilient. However, another important element plays a key role in maintaining this balance. That element is the presence of beneficial insects. Many gardeners instinctively view all insects as harmful. When a bug appears on a plant, the first reaction is often to remove it immediately. But in natural ecosystems, many insects actually help protect plants rather than damage them. One of the most recognizable beneficial insects is the ladybug. These small red beetles with black spots do not feed on plant leaves. Their primary food source is aphids, one of the most common pests found in vegetable gardens. A single adult ladybug can consume dozens of aphids in a single day. The larvae of ladybugs are even more active feeders while they grow. Another helpful insect is the lacewing. The larvae of lacewings are effective predators that consume aphids and other small insects. There are also tiny parasitic wasps that play an important role in controlling pest populations. These wasps locate certain pest insects and lay eggs inside their bodies. As the larvae develop, the host insect is eventually eliminated. Insects like these act as natural allies for the gardener. However, they will only remain in the garden if the environment provides the resources they need. One of the simplest ways to support beneficial insects is by planting flowers and herbs that produce nectar and pollen. Small flowering plants such as sweet alyssum, yarrow, dill, and fennel are particularly attractive to many beneficial species. When these plants bloom, they provide food sources for predators and parasitoids that help regulate pest populations. Some gardeners dedicate a small strip of land in the garden specifically for these flowering plants. When the flowers begin to bloom, the area becomes a gathering place for beneficial insects. From there, these insects spread throughout the garden, searching for pests. Shelter is also an important factor. A garden that is perfectly tidy with bare soil between every row may not provide suitable habitat for many beneficial insects. Small patches of natural vegetation, a few pieces of wood or scattered stones can create safe spaces where these insects can rest and reproduce. When the garden becomes welcoming to beneficial insects, a natural balance gradually develops. Yet that balance also benefits from careful observation by the gardener. One of the most valuable habits a gardener can develop is simply walking through the garden every day and observing the plants closely. Many experienced growers spend about 15 minutes each morning doing this. During this time, they look carefully at new leaves, turn leaves over to check for insect eggs, and inspect stems for early signs of pests. When only a few insects are present, they can be removed easily before the population grows larger. Regular observation allows the gardener to become familiar with the natural rhythms of the garden. Over time, it becomes easier to notice when plants are thriving, when insect activity increases, and when a gentle intervention might be helpful. When healthy soil diverse planting. Beneficial insects and regular observation all work together. The garden begins to maintain a stable balance. In such an environment, pests rarely reach levels that cause serious damage. With this foundation in place, gardeners can also use additional strategies that gently guide pest activity toward areas where it causes far less harm to the main crops. When the garden already has healthy soil, diverse planting, the presence of beneficial insects, and the habit of regular observation, the natural system within the garden begins to function more steadily. Even so, experienced gardeners often use a few additional strategies to reduce pest pressure. One of these strategies is known as trap cropping. The concept behind trap cropping is quite simple. Instead of trying to keep every insect away from the gardener intentionally plants certain crops that pests find more attractive than the main vegetables. These plants act as a natural point of attraction. When pests encounter these plants first, they tend to concentrate there instead of spreading across the rest of the garden. One common example involves the plant nasturtium. This flowering plant grows easily in many climates and produces bright, colorful blooms. Aphids are particularly attracted to nasturtium. When nasturtiums are planted around the edges of a vegetable garden, aphids often gather on those plants, rather than moving directly to crops such as beans or peppers. Another example uses radishes as a trap crop for certain small beetles that attack plants in the cabbage family. These insects are often more attracted to radish leaves than to other nearby vegetables. By planting radishes near the outer areas of the garden, the pests are drawn toward the radish plants first. Some gardeners also plant a variety of squash, known as blue Hubbard squash, at the corners of the garden. This plant is highly attractive to certain insects that commonly attack squash and pumpkin crops. When these pests gather on the trap crop, the main squash plants experience much less damage. Trap cropping does not eliminate pests entirely. Instead, it redirects their attention to areas where the gardener can manage them more easily. By concentrating pest activity in specific locations, the main vegetable crops remain better protected. Even with these strategies, there may still be moments when pests appear on important plants. When that happens, many gardeners rely on simple deterrent sprays made from common kitchen ingredients. One widely used mixture includes garlic and hot peppers. Garlic contains strong-smelling compounds that many insects avoid. Hot peppers contain capsaicin, a compound responsible for the spicy sensation that many insects find unpleasant. To prepare this mixture, gardeners often crush several cloves of garlic, along with a few hot peppers, and soak them in warm water. After the mixture sits for several hours, it can be strained and mixed with a small amount of mild soap, so the liquid adheres better to plant leaves. This type of spray works differently from chemical pesticides. It does not immediately kill insects on contact. Instead, it changes the smell and taste of the plant's surface. When insects encounter these treated leaves, they often move away in search of other food sources. It is important to remember that these methods act as supportive tools rather than the main solution. The true strength of a balanced garden still comes from healthy soil, diverse planting, beneficial insects, and careful observation. Once these elements are established, strategies like trap crops and natural deterrent sprays simply strengthen the protective system already working in the garden. Within such an environment, plants have a much greater chance to grow strong and productive without relying heavily on chemical treatments. When all of these elements begin working together, the experience of gardening starts to change. Pest control no longer feels like a constant battle. Instead, the garden slowly becomes a small ecosystem where natural processes support one another. Even within a balanced garden, there is still one stage of plant growth that often presents challenges. This stage occurs when young seedlings are first transplanted into the soil. During this early period, the stems of young plants are still soft and vulnerable. Certain insects that live in the soil take advantage of this weakness. One of the most common pests during this stage is known as the cutworm. These larvae usually remain hidden in the soil during the day and become active at night. They crawl along the surface of the ground, searching for tender plant stems. When a cutworm encounters a young seedling, it may chew through the stem near the soil line. In many cases, the plant collapses within hours. Gardeners sometimes discover this damage the following morning, when a healthy seedling that stood upright the day before is suddenly lying on the soil. Experiencing this can be discouraging because seedlings often require weeks of preparation before they are ready for transplanting. Losing them overnight may feel like losing an entire season of effort. A simple and effective way to protect young plants during this vulnerable stage involves placing a small protective collar around the base of each plant. Many Amish gardeners use small cardboard tubes made from the inner rolls of paper products. These cardboard collars are placed around the base of a young plant and gently pressed into the soil. The collar usually extends slightly above the soil surface, creating a barrier around the stem. When cutworms crawl along the soil at night, they are unable to reach the stem because the collar blocks their path. This simple barrier gives the seedling time to grow stronger stems during the first few weeks after planting. Another advantage of this method is that cardboard naturally breaks down over time. As the plant grows larger, the collar gradually softens and decomposes into the soil without leaving waste behind. This small technique reflects an important principle found in many traditional gardening practices. Often, the most effective solutions are simple, practical, and work in harmony with natural processes rather than relying on complicated treatments. Looking back at the entire approach to garden care, it becomes clear that each step contributes to building a balanced system. The process begins with improving soil health, so plants grow strong. It continues with planting diverse crops that create a more complex environment. Beneficial insects are encouraged through flowering plants and natural habitat. Regular observation helps the gardener detect changes early and respond calmly before problems grow larger. Trap crops redirect pest activity toward less important areas of the garden. Natural deterrent sprays may provide additional support when needed. Simple protective collars help young plants survive their most vulnerable stage. When all of these practices work together, the garden gradually develops the stability of a living ecosystem. Every element in that system plays a role and interacts with the others. In such an environment, pests may still appear from time to time because they are part of nature. However, they rarely grow into large outbreaks that threaten the entire garden. The goal is not to eliminate every insect. The goal is to maintain balance so that plants remain healthy and productive. As this balance develops, gardening begins to feel less like a struggle against nature and more like a partnership with the natural rhythms that shape life in the garden.